Okay, guys, so I wanted to continue to talk about narcissism, dismantling narcissism, and properly identifying it, and wanted to really start to get into how narcissism is falsely interpreted in psychology today. Okay, so it's completely misrepresented, as negative. Okay, and where does narcissism come from? So the story was about narcissism being a good-looking Greek man, okay? And the story goes that he was pursued by a nymph named Echo, okay? And, she pursued him and he turned her down for whatever reason, okay? Maybe he wasn't attracted to her. Maybe he thought that she was a different species than him, and it wouldn't work. And for some reason, he turned her down, and he began to stare at a pool, and he began to become infatuated with his own reflection. Okay, and he fell in love with his own reflection, and he stared at the pool long enough that he eventually became a flower and would stare at the pool for all eternity. Okay, and so that was the story. But how that is interpreted negatively is that he didn't affect anybody else. That's the thing about it. Okay, who did he affect negatively? It was just him. He was staring at himself, and he didn't bother anybody else. And the thing about it is that he seemed perfectly happy and perfectly self-sufficient. Even once he turned into the flower sitting there growing on the, he had plenty of water. That's all he needed, plenty of sunlight, I guess. And he was perfectly self-sufficient and by himself. And here's the kicker, didn't bother nobody else. Who else was he bothering negatively? No one. Okay. So, but how that was used, and some of these psychiatrists are getting into like Sigmund Freud and some of these other psychiatrists, they started to paint it as a negative. Okay, so all these negative actions and all these other negative things, that this phrase narcissism became popular and popularly used, and it became to represent all of these negative aspects, through psychology. And but getting into it, and I did one here in the previous video. So voids happen in people's lives. So void is a displacement, okay, that happens, and it could happen by parental issues, mommy daddy issues, this and that, the relationship issues, relationship splits. And there's a space there. Voids will be filled. They could be filled with something negatively. Okay, could be positive though. Once you realize, once a realization happens, and you have to have a realization, you have to go through this process, and it might be guilt. You might just have to have a realization that something wasn't right, and then growth can start. Okay, once growth starts, and it could happen immediately. Okay, you could have those problems, and you could start to fix them immediately and start to grow. Okay, but 9 times out of 10 in the negative world and negative society we live in, that people, they fill these things with something negative, and they start to seek attention to fill these voids. Okay, and that's okay, and it's okay to seek attention. That's not negative, and it's didn't affect anybody else negatively. But once they start to negatively affect people, they start to tell lies, they start to spread rumors, they start to affect other people's lives, and that could be detrimental. And once it starts to affect other people detrimentally, it crosses the line, and it most definitely is negatively. Okay, it's negative. So the void is there. Voids happen. All of us are scarred, and it's okay. It's okay. Mistakes happen. None of us are perfect. Having these realizations, saying where somebody was able to go, well, I'm not perfect. I'm flawed. I made a mistake. Okay. Most people will never get there. Okay. They will never get to the admission of guilt. Okay. that makes them feel guilty, and they may not be responsible for all that. Okay, you may not be responsible for those voids. Okay, it happens, but as long as you come to the realization, you start to begin the healing process immediately. The faster that you get on the road to recovery, and you start to grow, and you start to actually multiply positive things, your positive actions, and start to do things positive in your life. Okay, so just this attention seeking, it could be filled with a positive role model. It could be filled positively, and build a positive relationship. So once again, that does not have to be painted negatively, but most time it is. Most time it ends up happening. Okay, so the next being, reiterating here, voids, attention seeking, and then selfishness. So selfishness, once again, it doesn't have to be something negative. If you're just worried about yourself and putting yourself number one, you could be accused of selfishness for practicing a hobby. Okay, you could be accused of selfishness for practicing guitar. Okay, like I practice guitar. I have been. Someone say, "Man, you're so selfish." Why? Because you spend all your time practicing guitar. Man, you're selfish. Well, I didn't affect you or anything like that. I mean, I was practicing it for myself because I like to do that. I like to spend my time doing that, and I didn't affect you in any type of way. So that's falsely interpreted as being negative. Okay, I didn't affect anybody else, but all the narcissists, they'll come at you for different ways and for make other false accusations. But as long as you're not affecting anybody else, once again, it's falsely and misinterpreted. The next being greed, and greed. Somebody could accuse you of being greedy, and what is greed? It's not caring and not sharing. And ultimately, in a ultimate narcissist, that them practicing greed, it's them not wasting. Okay, they're being wasteful, but it's not caring and not sharing. However, as long as I don't affect anybody else, who are they to accuse you of being greedy? Who are they to accuse you? Why would it even be relevant for them to make these false accusations? Okay, so you could be accused of being greedy for something positive, like if you were to, because other people, maybe they're jealous of your time, maybe they're jealous of you spending your time doing something. You could be called greedy for spending time in the weight room. Wow, man, you're so greedy. Why? Because you spend a lot of time in the weight room. Man, wow, you have an ego, this and that. Or you're full of your own self. Okay, so that could be another one. Well, as long as I'm not affecting no one else, I'm just working out by myself. I'm just spending my own time doing my own thing. I'm not affecting anybody else. Whose business is it for them to tell me how to spend my time? It doesn't affect them. It only affects me in a positive way, and I was able to positively grow and spend my time doing that. So falsely and misinterpreted as something negatively. Okay, but however, greed, sometimes 9 times out of 10, it is referred to as bankers and people, doing something evil, not caring, not sharing, and affecting other people's lives. Okay, they're affecting other people's lives. Okay, so that's when it becomes into something wrong and something negative and positive, detrimental. Okay, so next, wanted to talk about when it actually crosses the line, and that being jealousy. Jealousy, what is jealousy? Jealousy is wanting something you don't have. Okay, so that's when it most definitely crosses the line, because they begin to want and totally be a pessimist and not thankful for their cup being half full, but yet they're jealous of the few drops that you have. They're jealous for the little bit of water that you have. They're not being thankful. They're being pessimists, and through pessimist is the mother of jealousy. Okay, and what is jealousy? Jealousy is wanting something you don't have. Okay. And that's when it affects other people, because you start to, And then when they act out on his jealousy is when it starts to develop into the next levels, you know what I'm saying? So, 1 being the void, 10 being dead, okay? That people could be actually be so jealous, they would kill you. Well, you're going to have to avoid these people, and, dismantling narcissism is the whole reason I was doing these whole things. So you can start to, try to identify these things. And then the quicker you get it and better at identifying them faster, you can avoid these people at any and all costs. So getting into the jealousy and, how that is negative, so, and when people act out on it, how they become psychopaths. So, a lot of the tendencies and things that they do, they'll project themselves as being perfect, and, if they are called out on, not being perfect, this could trigger, a chain of excuses where they were, start to make excuses, if, ands, whats, by, they start to make narcissistic phrases, excuses that nobody else was allowed to make, but yet they start to make them for themselves. But the thing about it is that, they'll start to get into doing something else. These excuses will happen, but they'll project themselves as perfect. But at the same time, and simultaneously, they'll do this in probably like the same few sentences or same little maybe verbal paragraph when they're speaking, that they'll begin to shame other people. Okay, begin to make fun of other people and wanting to seek energy by making other people feel shame. Okay, so I experienced a lot of this where people tried to fat shame me or fat shaming me or making fun of me and saying I was fat. And this even happened a lot, recently. Okay, but again, I have grown and started to learn, and I started to realize that these people, it's really their own insecurities, and this and that, why they were making these, that they felt the need to want to shame somebody else. And then, what happens next is that they start running, their own promotion about how great they are and how perfect they are, and they're so great and awesome. They didn't make any mistakes in any way, shape, or form. But yet somebody else was so fat, man. They're so fat and this and that. But it's really their own insecurities coming to light, and to them not wanting to spend the time on themselves, this and that. But they'll start to judge other people, they'll start to be real, so they pretend like they're so perfect, but yet they are shaming other people. They start to judge other people, being judgmental and all different ways of other people. But some of the easy ones were fat shaming somebody, making fun of somebody's sexual orientation, calling them names, making fun of them, but in the same time, there's acting like they're so perfect, acting like they're perfect. Okay, but really it's their own insecurities with that one, their own sexual hangups, their own problems, their own sexual insecurity, their own sexual flaws, their own sexual weaknesses. So somehow they're feeling strength or thinking that they gain energy by, making fun of somebody else's sexual orientation. Okay, so fat shaming, making fun of someone's sexual orientation, it's ultimately the insecurity of themselves, and their own problems that, they have not spent the time to sift through and to work out, and to really work on themselves. And that being one thing, but getting into arrogance. Okay, arrogance. It happens once the numbers come out. Okay, once the numbers come out, once the numbers are there, the narcissist, the numbers don't lie. Okay, the numbers are bold. The numbers don't have, any type of feelings. The numbers are, they're innate of feeling this emotion. They're not innate of feeling human emotions. They're just a bold black and white number, okay? But once the numbers come out and the narcissist, their weaknesses are realized, okay? They'll start to spin out of control, basically, okay? They'll start to make excuses are made, they'll start to shame other people. Their ego, so check this out, their ego is deflated by the numbers, okay? The facts come out, the truth comes out, okay? And their ego is deflated, and, second half of, and it could start right there. They could nip it right there in the bud and start to heal, but most of the time, because of their deflated ego, they need to, start to shame other people. So they'll start to diminish other people's talents or abilities, and so I had seen that a lot with sports, with people saying that people were overrated, and that once again they were just spewing some type of verbiage, but because how would they even know? How would they even know what the ratings are? What are the ratings? How would they even know what ratings mean? How they were applied to the sport? How it would have to be there. They would have to really be into the statistics. They would have to be into wanting to grow, and they weren't. So it's just kind of something like where people they try to diminish somebody else's ability or make it. Reducing their talent, that could be like somebody saying like, they weren't that good. They weren't good. They weren't that good. They just said they were good, and so all these people said that they were good, but yet they said, they weren't that good because, and then they start promoting themselves and talking about how perfect they are and how great they are, and this and that. So you start to see this and be like, man, that was a piece of work, man. These people got some mental problems, some serious mental problems. So that could be like somebody saying, you're not that good, you're not that tall. I've heard this one before. You're not that tall, you're not that big. Okay. Well, how does that affect you? I mean, it doesn't affect you. I'm okay with my own height. What business is that to them to say? But usually, and also maybe and some girls, they might have heard this before. They like people say, "Oh, she's not that good looking." She is not that good looking. Okay, you start to hear this and be like, well, why would somebody just say they're not, someone else wasn't that good looking just out of the blue like that? It's like, she is not that good looking, but because they were jealous. Okay, they were jealous of somebody else, and ultimately, their weaknesses were realized, but yet they were scared to admit them or not wanting to admit them, and not wanting to feel that shame, that guilt of their own imperfections, and yet they start to diminish other people. But here's the kicker that always comes next, okay, is that they'll start to use a narcissistic phrase, and they'll start to promote themselves. They'll start to talk about how awesome they were, how perfect they were, how and narcissistic phrase will come, well, I was the one. So I heard that one a lot. I was the one who did this first, or talk about how great they are. So diminishing somebody else's ability, reducing somebody else's talent level, talking about ratings, or they weren't that good, or saying somebody wasn't that good looking, or saying somebody wasn't that big, they weren't that strong, they weren't that tough. They weren't anything. Oh yeah, but I was the one who did this, and I was the best at this and this and that, and blah blah blah. And they'll try to end it on with them being, them boosting their own ego and some type of way, shape, or form. So that's kind of like this narcissistic game they start to play. So I'm gonna wrap this one up here.